the sound bites on the back of sound bites. I'm just glancing over the ones they handed me. Mental alertness has little to do with ordinary thinking. Take that, you will brain you. Here on the copy that the newsroom did, mental is underlined because alertness in life, just as long as I've got this one, I'll point out, alertness in life generally means everything. Because if you're not alert, you would drink poison, you'd walk in front of a car, you'd cut your throat while shaving. Mental alertness has little to do with ordinary living. Some of these news items, once you think about it, are so obvious that if you get good at it on your own, any picturization of merry-go-rounds and loop-de-loops doesn't begin to touch it because there is no way in or out of that. Once you see that mental alertness, once you have your own new understanding, your own operational, not theoretical, not something that you read in a book that says man does not live in the present. People dream in the past. They've been floating that around verbally for as long as man has been talking. So I'm not talking about theoretically for you to say, well, people could be more alert. They could be more on guard intellectually. If you understand it, once you've got your own understanding of it, then it's no longer something to talk about. It's not funny. After the first absolutely terrifying fright of the first time you realize I have lived blank number of decades in a state that is not even up to my minimum, I could be more alert, much more alert to say the least. Then you're left with this kind of news item that mental alertness really got much to do with just living. But notice, if you tell an ordinary person that, if I'd told you that, or if someone had told you that with in an impressive manner some time back, you would have resisted it, as you should. Any reasonable, civilized person, if you told them that mental alertness has almost nothing to do with living, you know what would happen. If they did not deny it, it would almost be, to themselves, an admission that they were not up to the minimal level of being educated, conscious, civilized. The safe way to do it, of course, is for a man, as ordinarily happens, to never realize that he could be more alert. They like to play with it. In your lifetime, all of these sort of Zen-based TV shows or movies that they keep inferring, is it still all right? That not just the kickboxing and the karate, but always lingering at least in the background, the idea that all of this has to do with not just making your body this living weapon, but that in some way this is going to transfer over into a man's mind. I know that there are movies and books and TV shows that some wise teacher in a kimono. Is that the difference? Is that the difference between a bathrobe and a kimono? Whether you have Oriental features and speak with an accent, or have Mississippi features and speak with an accent? Is that a kimono you're wearing? No, this is my mother's terry cloth robe. Mama left it to me when she died. At any rate, it's throughout history. I was just trying to bring up an example up to date, even up to science fiction movies have their own version, but I was thinking about all of these in the last 20 years that have been all over the popular culture of some American student, some Western student, takes up with some Far Eastern martial arts teacher, and then somewhere along the line, after he's really put him through the gutter and scrubbed his ass from top to bottom and beat him up, he finally says, of course, realize, my boy, this instruction, our school, the tradition, is not simply to teach you how to beat up people. It's not simply to teach your mind how to be a dangerous weapon. It's to teach not your body, it's to teach your mind to be a self-protecting weapon for your own use. Anybody? Well, many people, whether there was any chance of them taking up at a karate or kung fu school, many people. Oh, yes. And if you know how, I won't do it. Religions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, their holy texts are full of that same thing. It just seems to be under another guise. The thing is, life is continually pointing out that you can be more alert. And it goes under all sorts of guises. The most common is that you could be smarter via education, because that seems to be non-mystical. It's to simply tell people that you would do better in life. Telling somebody that's out there laying asphalt for the state, and you find out that the person dropped out of the 10th grade. They can't keep up the payments on their mobile home, etc. And you tell the person, the institutions of life tell people, what you need is more education, and your mind, because there's less and less demand for back-breaking labor. The guy says, tell me about it. It is more and more a matter that the mind needs to be put in action, which they've been saying that for 5,000 years also. It just always seems to be fairly new, and they have upped the stakes of it. But rather than making it sound strange, like you should be more alert, and there the guy is up to his knees in sticky asphalt and sweaty and flies all, he thinks, what do you mean alert? Be more conscious. What do you want from me? But if you say something like, no offense, this job needs to be done, but I'll bet now you almost wish you'd stayed in school, or that you had the advantage of a higher education, because you could be sitting in one of these air-conditioned cars going by in a limo if you were an attorney, some other kind of ne'er-do-well with an education. And the man goes, yes. But it's still the same thing. It is still life exhorting in all sorts of subtle ways that a man and men in general should be expanding their nervous system up here. If they're going to expand the body, that's a hobby nowadays. Mental alertness has little to do with ordinary living. Is it not good, now that you understand it yourself, from your own experience, those of you who do, isn't it good that people are not faced with that? How would you like to have been, put yourself in as a standing example for the rest of humanity? Back when you were not prepared, how would you have liked it if life had one day just grabbed you, you're walking down the street, whistling, minding your own business, skipping the crack so that you wouldn't break your mother's back, doing it all in what seems to be your normal state, and suddenly life, this hand comes out of an alley, flips you back there and slaps you around and says, you simple son of a bitch, what the hell you think you got a mind for? You could be more alert, you're walking around out of daze. And right then you realize it. And you thought, Jesus, I'm 50 years old, 30 years old, 20 years old, I'm already somebody. And I became somebody in a dream in this state. Aren't you glad that didn't happen? Well, that could be off-putting. City vocational tip, since we're talking about laying down asphalt and stuff. If you're going to preach, you're going to sweat. Should I fool with that one, do you understand? Take preach in the widest. If you're going to offer advice, if you're going to spur others on, if you're going to dish out guilt, if you're going to lecture, if you're going to get in front of a crowd, it's dangerous. If you've got some sort of extraordinary purpose in your own mind. But if you're going to exhort others on, which is preaching, you're going to sweat. You do not find ordinary people engaged in that kind of advice dancing, the passing back and forth of laxatives, according to one guy. I don't understand either. You're not going to find people who in any sense are calm, cool, and collected for one reason, because no one involved with the act knows what they're doing. And yet notice, if you went out to those of you know what it is, a good sawdust tent revival of some guy pacing up and down, ripping off his coat, sweat marks as big as your head down here, all the way from that to a political leader, perhaps in more refined air-conditioned conditions, with his coat still on. But if you notice, if they amount to anything, if they have a following, if what they say or saying seems to be important to some group of people, they are sweating. People in showbiz, I don't mean to make it too strange, if they are good at what they're doing, that is, they've got a following. I'm not saying good from our position of being critics of life. If they have a following, they're good, whether they're singers, dancers, poets, reciting their own work. Ministers of the gospel, politicians, lecturers on anything, if they have a following, they're sweating. But notice again the, may I say, justice of life. That if an ordinary person followed this, and I'll go ahead and take the position, they would say, well, what's the point? Certainly they do. Because for one thing, James Brown didn't get to be the hardest working man in show business. The New York father of funk. That was a later name. It was originally the godfather of soul. The man did not get that way by them pushing him out on a wheelchair and him sitting there and go, well, maybe I'll sing one. The point is, life would say, ordinary minds would say, well, certainly, if someone is good at what they do, or if they have a following, to use my description, which would show that they're good at it, then they have to be, how about passionate? Don't just say sweat. They have to be into what they're doing. Oh. I see, yes. Is that not true? What else would you expect? How are they going to be popular? How would you like to go see someone? Since I understand James Brown's no longer doing those lectures on how to buy real estate for no money down. So you go to one of the other versions. You go to see a guy, and you've heard about his book or saw him on TV or something. And if you go there, and the man comes out and says, hello, and then maybe sits down instead of pacing, but just begins to display a real lackluster interest in what he's talking about. And he seems to be even talking about the same words that you had read in some article he wrote. Something is seriously wrong. So you would expect passion. I mean, you expect no less. If it's not there, you want your money back. You're going to leave. Back to the news item. In the city, that is under civilized, ordinary conditions, if you're going to preach, you're going to sweat. And now leave the ordinary view, which now you know, all I do is find out the obvious when I'm doing that part. So don't take that as anything important. Like, by God, that's true. Well, sure, it's true. But now leave all that. Now we're supposed to get somewhere else. Why do people sweat? Why is it a burden? Why is it? And of course, they would say again, if you said, boy, you really put on a show out there, and all you're doing is talking about real estate, or all you're doing is giving a lecture on the PBS network on child psychology or something, but boy, and the guys backstage or the woman beforehand, man with credentials, degrees, books. I assume you all know. Well, I'm sure you do. But the butterflies, stage fright, big names. They're backstage, sweating bullets, about to throw up. And you say, well, how many times do you do it? Oh, I do it all the time. I do it for a living. Well, why are you so upset? Well, people expect. I want to do good. I want to get forth what I'm... We know all that. Now I ask you, why do people sweat in the city when they preach? There's one simple reason, like everybody else. They have no idea what they're talking about. And it tends to make one somewhat nervous. Huh? Because at any minute, here could be the Pope, the world's most famous millionaire off of cheap real estate, is standing there doing his spiel, and suddenly hundreds of thousands of people stand up. The whole body of the Catholic Church, millions of people suddenly are gathered there, and they stand up. And here's this man devote his whole life, real sweet looking, doing whatever. I'm just picking out one religion. That's the easy one. Doing all these little things, and suddenly, whatever it is, 50 million people stand up and go, you're full of it. There's always that possibility, and people know it. Well, they can't talk about it, but I could get the Pope. He looks reasonable. I could get a few drinks in the man and say the same thing, and he'd go, he wouldn't want to say anything, but he'd go, because every time he walks out there on that balcony and looks, it's 20,000 people, although a lot of them are Italian. I'll give you that. They're tourists. There's some real people in there, but a lot of them are local and Italian. And he looks out there and he starts all this mumbo-jumbo and blah, blah, blah. This either that or here's how to make $1 million in 2 weeks in real estate. It's all the same thing. And there's this thing going on all the time that, are they going to buy it again? Is this going to fly? Have I got a job for another day? Am I going to be able to go out and do whatever they do and wave, candles and, yes, you too can be rich like me. I was once ugly and poor, and now look, you can do it too. And you just wait. At any minute, everybody's going to go, oh, come on. And, 50 million people are going to get up en masse and walk out. Not even mad, not even going to bother to lynch you. They just finally stand up and point out the obvious. This is a bunch of shit. And they walk out. That was what I was going to suggest to you. Of course, don't say that to ordinary people, because ordinary people, that's true. They're supposed to sweat to show that they're passionate. I mean, and it flies. You can't deny it. With ordinary people, they say, well, you got to. A man just teaching physics, if he's, has any reputation at a university, something that dry, he still puts on a fairly good show. He sweats. He's preaching. Just remember, because you're all involved with it one way or the other at times during the day, they sweat because they don't know what they're talking about. But remember, it's not just the Pope, and it's not guys doing lectures, it's everybody. Life is running the ballroom. Nobody knows what they're talking about if you're talking about what life wants you to talk about. You got no choice. It's not that there are people here that could do better here on the planet. If you're doing life's bidding, if you're shilling for life, which you only got two choices, you're involved with something like this off on your own, or you're shilling for life. You may be a small time shill, or you could be big time. You could be famous. You're still a plagiarist. You're still mouthing life's words. You're using its script. So everybody's involved with it, and you got no choice, and that's why you sweat, because no one knows what they're talking about. There's not enough deodorant, there's not enough underarm pads to stop it, because that's not where the sweat's coming from. The sweat's coming from the nervous system up here of, well, I'm glad you all could be here, and now on with my lecture. And you begin to sweat. But it's brain sweat. It's not underarm sweat. You're sweating because, and here it is, you're an expert. You walked out, and before you said a word, you're famous. They're already sounding applaud, and people are throwing up roses and their phone numbers, and yes, and waving banners, hooray for you. And still, if you're any good, now if you're an ordinary human, but you're famous, you're good. And as soon as you say, well, thank you, no. You look humble, and sit down, and you begin to sweat here. For one reason. Not because you want to do a good job. Not because you owe it to your audience. Not because you're an expert. It's because you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And I'm sorry, hell. What the hell are you talking about? Well, we had so many. Let me get to this one. They should have devoted a whole news show to this one item. They didn't ask me. Rather than just read the news item, since I know what it was, I was already sneaking up on it. It probably passes by so fast, like many other things in life. It's not that you were in any way should have been particularly alert to it, but you do know, all the way from religions, all sorts of other institutional settings, that there are, in their books, and the news item itself, it was on this basis, that said generally covers this kind of subject. But you can hear it in the midst of lectures, whether it was actually labeled that this was going to be the topic, but you can hear it en passant as a priest, a rabbi, a minister, a lecturer, a psychologist will be talking. They will be trying to give hints about, well, I know that some of you get discouraged. I'm doing their part now. I know some of you get discouraged trying to live a good Christian or a good Buddhist life, trying to live as a decent citizen, trying to be a good parent. I know many of you that perhaps were abused as children, and now you find yourself sometimes wanting to hit your own nipper right in the mouth. And I know you struggle against it, and you feel like, well, sometimes I'm making progress and I'm not. And I know some of you came to my lectures here 2 years ago. I remember your faces, and some of you talked to me and cried after the lecture. And I know that many of you wonder. I know that you're trying hard and you try to do better, and whether it's under religious or temporal settings. The point is, then they will say something about, and I know that many of you wonder, am I getting better at this? Am I improving? Am I actually changing for the better? And some of the people in the audience still actually want to write and say, what do you think is going on in life in general? Or what do you think about the ordinary level of intelligence of people? Not individual people, of humanity. That they must dance with themselves on that level, in case you missed it. You did miss it? Think about it. A man's changing. Well, let me go back to religion, since that seems to be the easiest example, and that's just archetypical of culture, that is man's intellectual life, again, that we're not singling it out, but let me make the point. You're hearing a sermon. You're hearing someone trying to drive you on to a greater life along the lines of their particular dogma, but just in general. Be a better person. Do not lie. Do not cheat. Just be a better human being by God. Try to overcome bad habits. Not just bad habits that hurt you, just drinking or smoking or something, but the bad habits of criticizing your neighbor, slandering other people. Try and do better. And you can't say anything negative about that kind of verbal support from someone. And then they say, well, now wait, I know that you've heard this before, and I know many of you perhaps have heard it from me, and I know some of you struggle and you come to church or you go to a psychiatrist, whatever the setting is. But they'll say perhaps you come to church, and some of you have been trying to live a good Catholic or Jewish or Buddhist life now for 20 or 30 years. Some of you have been right here in my congregation. I know that you put in your tithes to help keep up the church, and I know that you go through the rituals and you fast and you pray. And I still know sometimes you will sit around. I know. Even though I'm in the ministry, I know you'll think, well, am I living a better life? Am I doing any better? And then they'll grab, like the Bible, if we're going to talk about Christianity, and they'll say, well, let us turn to page so-and-so, where it says, and all this, you're so used to it. Think about that. The man himself, forget the man, of course, this is life talking to itself through man. But the man is saying, here it is, you're making extraordinary efforts because it's not natural to cease being a critic of your fellow man. It's not natural to be non-slanderous. It's not natural to just be a non-thief, and etc. And you people are trying, and he admits all that, and he knows that you've been trying, and then says, and then you wonder, am I doing any better? But thank God we've got the book here. We've got what Buddha said. We can look here and see. Think about it. He's already admitted, and if you're sitting there going along with the dance, that you are spent 20 years trying to make this extraordinary effort, and you don't know whether it's even working. You don't even know whether it's had any effect. But thank God, I don't know, it takes a second, you don't really hear that, but thank God we can turn to chapter so-and-so where it says, if you're poor, then when you, I don't know why it says, I was going to make a joke. I won't do that. I won't give you an easy way out. But people go, oh, good. That there's some way to tell. Some extrinsic way to you. You understand? That they're saying, thank God at least we've got the Bible, we've got the Word of God, we've got the Word of Freud. We've got something extrinsic that they can wave. But they went past your station real quick. The station where you sort of, wait a minute, you're right. I have spent 20 years trying to be a good Jew, a good Christian, I've been trying to clear my mind psychologically. If we're going to gather religion. I've been trying to do this. You're right. I've spent thousands and thousands of dollars, man hours. And you're right. Sometimes I wonder, well, is it worth it? Or have I accomplished anything? And he's pointed out to you, the man that you have been taking instruction from, the guy apparently representing the institutional setting of a church, say. And he admits. And he says, well, me too. But it's like the train pulls up, by a station, and you look around that station, I don't know how to describe it. Forget ideas, whatever the worst drawing you ever saw back in the high school textbook of Dante's Inferno or hell. I mean, it's like you come up to a station, it's the station from hell, and the train slows down just enough, and you look out, and not just hell, it also looks like maybe it's got your name, as part of the name. And it's like it slows down just enough, you look out the window, and then it just takes off, and everybody goes, phew, like they don't want to think about it. But consider that you've spent your whole life trying to do something extraordinary, and the person that perhaps you looked at as being the shepherd of your extraordinary effort, you're a priest, rabbi, a psychiatrist, could be a friend. But normally institutional setting is the easiest one to describe. And they admit, we've all spent our life doing this. Some of you people have been here coming to hear me talk here at the church or the temple for 20 years. I know some of you. And sometimes you wonder, all the effort, all the money, all the expense, all the charitable works you've done, and you wonder, have I personally actually improved? And everybody goes, yeah. And it's like you just slow down just a little at this station, and the goddamn thing's on fire, and it's got your name on it, and it stinks. It's unbelievable. I don't know how to describe it. You just think, You know, I'm going to die from the fright of looking at it. And the train just suddenly before you can do anything, it keeps going. It says, well, thank God, you don't have to wonder. The answer's here. Think about it. You spent 20 years trying to change, and he points out, sometimes you wonder, have I changed at all? And it's just you glance at that station, and I can't describe how horrible it is. And now you need somebody to tell you, has your 20 years of effort had any effect? Think about it. And you need a book. You need somebody else. May I point out the obvious? You know, you live with you. Most of you, as far as I know, you're with you 24 hours a day. And yet the same people, the same institutions, which of course is life itself, trying to spur you on to great efforts to change. As always, whatever the setting was, to change, to do better, but to change. Let's leave it at change right quick, which is the easy. That's real dirty, but you guys got dirty minds and can take it. To change. That's what life wants everybody to do, whether it's under a religious setting or whether it's just you off by yourself, a hermit. Around no priests, no rabbis, no holy books. A hermit is trying to change, or he wouldn't be out there. So life is making everybody want change. What could be simpler than that? But the setting, it gets all, the train, the trappings there in the train, you know, the windows of your train pulling up to this ungodly station, just slowing down. And the windows are tinted. You know, you're getting dizzy. There's all sorts of things. But change is simple. Change is, think about it. Somebody's got to ask you, have you changed? Now, of course, we're talking about in the nervous system. But if you put on 10 pounds, you know it. If you go into church and the minister says, my God, you haven't been here in several months. Well, no, I've been out of town. Well, you've changed. Yeah, put on 10 pounds on vacation. Everybody knows that. Change. You know what change is. Change, if you really was that acutely tuned in to awareness of your body, change was a half a pound with some people. They go, ooh. Now, how about something that from a more human view, more modern view, is even more important, is intellectually, internally. Of course, in religion, they'd call it spiritual and other stuff. It's all the same. It's non-physical. What could be more important than that? And then to think, all right, I've spent 20 years trying to do this, and somebody points out, it's hard to tell if it's had any effect whatsoever, isn't it? And I'll go, yeah, it is. And the train takes off. Well, thank God I'm here to tell you. And it's like, boy, I'm glad I didn't have to look at that. Well, I was hoping to, well, it's a variation. I set you up several weeks ago with a news item. I was just now trying to zero you in. It was like the one I pointed out that, you know, these tests, how to tell if one of your family members has a drinking problem. And then there's these 10 questions, and they do them slow so that you can write them down. And most of you got that when you thought it was, you know, laughing at somebody else, sort of. Now, wait a minute. You're living, they're talking about a family member. You're living with somebody, and you got to write down and ask yourself 10 questions, or just, you know, some part of them. 5? How about 1? That you need an external source to tell you, here's some questions to ask. Does a family member have a drinking problem? And you think, well, I've wondered about my husband or my mother. What do you mean you wonder? You know, have we got people walking around with no brains? Nah. See, that was just to get you on the point. It's alertness. Alertness doesn't have anything to do with it. Not mental alertness. So, see, a lot of you liked that several weeks ago. We went, yeah, that is kind of spooky, frightening. That, you know, who wants to? We don't slow down and look at that. This is like upping the stakes. And yet it goes on continually. Continually. Under all sorts of guises, people trying to ask themselves. If you really get more refined at this, they seem to be asking themselves, even with just the slightest amount of prodding. They dress it up, as always. Am I doing better at such and such? But it amounts to one simple word: change. Now think about what level of mental alertness or what funny is going on in the ballroom of city life that you do not know, that you would swear you don't know. And it will pass for intelligence. If you know how to do it just right, it passes for better than average intelligence to say, well, many people say that they're a lot better person than they were years ago. And the more educated nowadays, in fact, can twist it in a certain way and sort of look down their little noses at such ideas as fundamentalist religions of all sorts that believe in instant conversion. Like a man stand up, I'm proud to be here. Last week 20 years I was a drunk and cheated on my wife, and I was at this service last Friday, and the Lord touched my soul, and suddenly I was blinded. The St. Peter, who it was, St. Paul syndrome, that I'm struck down, and the God's reality, the reality of a good life just suddenly struck me, and I have never been the same since. Instant conversion. The more you are sophisticated in ordinary sense, the more you tend to feel superior to that. In other words, it is a sign of intelligence to say, yeah, that's all right. I understand that kind of fundamentalism, in Islam, Christianity, Judaism, all over the planet. There's been stories, I'm aware of that. I'm doing a part of somebody who is more sophisticated, up to date, and educated. And they say, but I'll tell you the truth. That sort of change, I know they mean well, maybe they believe it. But, that kind of drastic change is much more subtle. It is much more complex than that. And, of course, the guy saying that, if he's under the right circumstance, they're staying at a cocktail party, college people, college professors, and it's a sign of intelligence to say, it's not that simple. What are they saying? They're the ones that'll take the damn test or go buy a book. How to tell if you've changed. Well, first, that's a heavy one. First, I got to find out whether my wife has a drinking problem. I got to wait for that ad. I only wrote down 8 of the questions, and there are 10. I got to get the other 2, to really make sure. Oh, well. If I have to do a wrap, since we got 2 minutes, you do understand, I know all of you do, that's rhetorical, it's not an attack on life, and etc., etc. But consider how problematic, to say the least, the idea of change is. Whereas ordinary minds, forget other people, your ordinary mind, the nervous system is made to actually, literally believe otherwise. It has to stay alive, because it is open-ended and men do change. Humanity changes. The nervous system grows, but men have to believe that they, in their lifetime, in very specific ways, can change. Behavior, certainly is possible. Especially, if you find out you're dying of cirrhosis of the liver, many real sharp people can cut down their drinking, and some of them will even stop. They can alter behavior under those kinds of conditions wherein they undergo a kind of epiphany. But the idea of actual change of who you are, which would affect your nervous system, we're now beyond the areas of fat, muscle, consumption of alcohol, red meat. We're beyond behavior. Talking about changing what you are, which grows out of the hormones of those rutting and rolling around behind the furnace, and then move on up to condo chronology, into now trying to deal with your neurons. That kind of change is so, would you like uncertain, doubtful, difficult, very complex, that people are made to believe absolutely otherwise. Or they wouldn't even try anything. They wouldn't even stay on the train to pull up to the kind of stations that periodically are on fire. And the stations not only just say hell and maybe have your name, it's the stations that say change is possible. And the train slows down and that thing is demolished. Or else, if you're really good, you recognize it was never there to start with. But at any rate, the train always picks up speed. But people believe, their nervous system believes, oh, I saw it quite clearly. Oh, yeah, I can change. But then think, if that is true, where in the world does it come up with the idea that everyone accepts that, well, you should ask yourselves the following 10 questions, 3 questions, a couple of questions. Have I changed? Well, let me write this down. You've got to check on yourself. Has a loved one in your family, that is in you, has someone in your family changed? Well, can I write down that? Wait, can you repeat it so I can get this down? Because I want to be sure. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to think maybe I've changed and gotten better and I hadn't. Or what if I take the test? Contrary. And I find out I've even changed more and I'm better than I thought I had. Good night, dreamers.